All right, friends. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Thursday. We will give it just a minute or two, let some folks jump on, but we're thrilled you chose to spend a couple of minutes with us on this Thursday morning. Just a quick audio visual check. If you can hear us, go ahead, type something in the chat, let us know, and then we will get rolling. Somebody say hello, and then we'll go. Awesome. Thank you, friends. We have, if you know anything about us, Provider Trust, you know that we typically do a monthly webinar series on compliance and HR related topics. It's really formal. We do hour-long sessions, but every now and then there's a moment in time where we pull our heads together internally and say, gosh, it's time. Our clients are asking us a ton of questions. It's a good idea to get on the phone for 15 or 20 minutes and really just give you a chance to ask some questions of us, and for us to give you our thoughts on a few questions that we're kicking around and that we're hearing from the marketplace and from our clients as well. And so that's exactly what we've got today. This is not a webinar per se, but essentially a live Q&A with what we've been asked and some of the frequently asked questions that we're starting to hear from the marketplace and from our clients and the world in which we're playing in, given the Biden administration vaccine mandates that came out just a few weeks ago. So I'm gonna get rolling, grab a cup of coffee. This will be 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes tops. And we're hoping to give you a sense of where our heads are at as folks that are kind of living in the world of employee counts and people requirements and monitoring. And that's the world that we're living in. We're going to give you a sense of what we're hearing, what we're thinking, and potentially where we're hoping to go. So if you don't know these folks on the phone, I'm just going to do some quick introductions. Mike Rosen is a co-founder of Provider Trust, and what he likes to say is a recovering attorney by background. He spends a lot of time thinking through legislation, regulatory requirements, the impacts to our business. Donna Thiel is our chief compliance officer at Provider Trust, with having spent decades as a chief compliance officer and a leader in the post-acute world, helping organizations just navigate compliance challenges and really to keep patients safe all throughout. And so Mike and Donna do a lot of our internal education. They do a lot of our external education as well. We're thrilled to have both of them. Figured it was a good time to jump on the phone and let them tell you kind of what they're thinking about. So let's start with, we've got sort of two issues at play: the OSHA temp action and the CMS interim rule. Mike Rosen, I'd love for you to kick off with just a quick, the differences between the two. What are we talking about today? And then I think the first question I'm going to ask you to lead into is there's a lot of noise about 100 employees. What does 100 employees mean, right? Where's your head at on those two things?
Okay, thanks, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Happy fall, y'all. Let's talk about, as Dave outlined, a lot going on in this area, and a lot still remains to be seen, as well as put forth as in the terms of guidelines. Interestingly enough, we should be receiving some at the end of this month and potentially others in October. So lots of lawyers are trying to figure this out. I was actually on a CLE yesterday on this issue and learned a few things, at least where others think that this is going. So as Dave pointed out, there really are two issues here at play. One or both may apply to your organization. We're not here to tell you which category you fall in, but likely you'll be affected by certainly one, if not both. So OSHA is something that, interestingly enough, there's the federal OSHA guidelines, and then there are 21 states that actually have OSHA state regulations. And so it's important to note that if you fall in one of those states, your state may actually also may be coming out with guidelines. And as long as they are more restrictive, or at least not less restrictive than the federal, they too can apply. So please look out for that in your state. OSHA, of course, is a general concept for safety in the workplace. What's interesting, and what everybody agrees, is that OSHA is a pretty small agency. It's one of the smallest federal agencies out there, and I think Donna's going to talk a little bit about this. It's been tasked with something that it doesn't really have the resources to yet enforce, and remains to be seen how they're going to get this done. But that's who landed the lucky COVID wild card. But it does apply, and we'll talk more in detail about employers with 100 or more employees. But let's be clear, if OSHA, if we're talking about the temporary action, which was issued by the Biden administration, it allows for vaccination or testing. It is not a mandatory vaccination. It allows you to choose based on your organization which ones you're going to do, but you have to do one or the other. Now, there's nothing yet out there on how to track, who you have to show conformance with the testing, who's going to pay for the testing. Likely, it's going to be the employer. The federal government probably is running out of money given all the other testings that they're allowing that are covered. But we're going to all assume the cost is going to be borne by the employer. How often you have to test, these are things that remain. It is interesting to note that the last time a vaccination case came before the US Supreme Court was 1904. And the Supreme Court upheld, facts were different, but upheld a governmental mandated vaccine. So there is some precedent. There are already some states, I think Utah is one of them, whose attorney general has challenged this. And so it's going to go to the highest level. All right, let's separate OSHA, a safe work environment, from employers of 100 or more with the vaccination and or testing standard with the CMS interim rule. And again, your organization may have both that apply. That rule was issued and is effective immediately. It was effective as soon as it's published. It was published more than a month or so ago. Initially, of course, it only applied to nursing facilities, broadly speaking, nursing facilities, but August 18th, some guidelines came out that very definitively made it broader and expanded it to all providers of healthcare, hospitals, doctor's office, dialysis clinics, home health. You're all covered under the interim final rule. There will be more guidance coming out in October for all of us to read through, and we'll give you an update as we see them. But interestingly to note, if this is news to you, it clearly covers non-direct care providers as well as direct care providers. So your back office, just like you do with exclusion monitoring, they can be a provider directly in front of a patient, or a back office. It still applies under the interim rule. There are two exceptions. We don't have time to get into them. One is a sincerely held religious exemption. There's going to be a lot of litigation on that, but basically you have to determine that someone is sincerely believing that. You may not believe in what they believe, but if they sincerely do believe it, it may meet a religious exception under this interim rule, and or if there is a minimal hardship or cost to accommodate. These are the standards that you'll have to work with your labor council on as they come out. Anyway, one area that might be worth kind of putting out to the side, would be very interesting to see, is how far CMS takes it from the standpoint, could they pull your conditions of participation if you do not comply? Unknown, but probably the biggest hammer that's out there. We're not going to talk about federal contractors, but if you are, there is a place you could go currently to get sort of a sneak peek on what is likely coming, and that is called the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. If you type that in Google, you'll find kind of where the government is today and likely to go for federal contractors. So that sets the stage on that. Donna, what any thoughts you have on the big picture here?
Not really. I think really the most important thing, as Mike's talking about this, we are waiting for CMS to publish the rule, right? So let's just be clear, the rule's not out. We're waiting for that to come. And I think what we're all doing today, whether we're a healthcare provider or whether we are an employer of 100 and more, is speculating, right? We're trying to figure out, how do we get ahead of this? What should we be doing in anticipation of the final rule coming out? And I think it's really important that we think about education. And Dave, if it's okay, I'll kind of fall into that education conversation. So all of us today have been grappling with, how do we manage our own workforces? Do we mandate the vaccine? Do we not mandate the vaccine? Do we only allow people that are vaccinated to come into the office? What does return to work look like? Right? All of that is a challenge for us. But I think the only way to get in front of it is understanding what our employees need. Like, what do they need to feel comfortable to return to work? What do they need to feel comfortable getting the vaccination, and having conversations, and then building the education around that. Like, you know, we at Provider Trust just hired our 100th person. So for the first time, for us, this is a huge milestone, and we've already been grappling, right, with vaccinations in our own organization, but we will now be under this, the OSHA, the guidance when it comes out. And what we're doing here is really trying to learn from our teams, like what are you scared about and what can we do? And I think in my kind of my other life, if you will, as part of the post-acute compliance consortium group, right, on the healthcare side of it, doing the same thing, right, really asking people and really looking to our medical staff to help us find fact and fiction and bring that together so that we can make sure that when these rules finally come about, that we're prepared, and maybe it's not such a lift because we've already understood the apprehension and the fear that our workforce members have. So I really think understanding what people need, you know, quashing those fears or hopefully alleviating those fears, and then preparing us for, okay, the rules here. Now, how are we going to live within those guidelines?
Yeah, well said. I think another question that we've continued to hear, certainly, Donna, you've answered the question of so what should we do today as we are waiting, as we are sort of speculating, how do we get ahead of it a little bit? The next question that we're starting to hear a little bit is and Mike, I'd love for you to take a stab at this one. Is this a medical records issue?
Sure, absolutely. I think we just real quickly on the 100th employee, what defines 100, because I think that's kind of still yet to be defined. You know, 100 is a magic number in the federal legislation. You see the Warren Act and you see National Labor Relations Board. Those are all set at 100. Family Medical Leave Act. Those others, 100 seems to be the number. So whether you have 100 or not is going to depend on whether the regulations require you to count part-time and full-time, only full-time equivalents. Did you have to average 100 employees in 2021? Like, we just hit 100. So we haven't averaged for the year. Does that mean we're not 100? These are the things that are going to come out. But really important question that you asked on medical records. Let me just make this really clear. The vaccination card, if you choose to track it, and or the results of the testing, if you choose to allow under OSHA, is the medical record. You need to treat this as a medical record and separate it from an HR file. It should not go in the HR file. So however and wherever you store medical records, the results of testing or potentially the vaccination should be conservatively said, treated as such. And so this is going to come into a lot of issues when people challenge for religious exemption, and they're going to try to catch you or get a gotcha that you stored it in the HR file and now you're discriminating against me. So don't make that cardinal mistake.
Well said. So I want to go back to, you know, Donna, if you touched on this a little bit, but for employers, what are the obligations that any of you know, us as an employer, of what are the obligations we have on education around COVID-19? You touched on a little bit about that, but also, you know, is we think about asking questions during the interview process. We think about, you know, Mike touched on how do we train internally around medical records and how does this go into it? I'm curious what your thoughts are. What can we potentially get ahead of from an education perspective around COVID-19 internally with our own teams?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it really starts with polling your team members, like just really polling them and understanding, you know, as we're getting closer, right? We know the rule is going to come out. We know we're going to fall under these requirements. So, you know, making decisions as a leadership team, what are we doing today to determine who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated? And what does that population look like and feel like? And do we have medical exemptions such that we're not going to really worry too much about this particular population? But then we have a handful of a population that just flat out doesn't want to get vaccinated. And what does that mean for us? And I think, again, polling, asking the questions, understanding, looking at the resources that are available to us in, you know, in the healthcare industry. If you have associations like, and again, my post-acute background, right? We have HCA and NCAL and leading age that are out here giving us information every day that we can utilize. For the employers, looking at CDC, looking at the healthcare organizations that are in our communities, that we can leverage the medical staff of the local hospital that is the most prominent in my community as an employer outside of healthcare, bringing those people into the organization in a 15-minute coffee chat like this, where we're just get to the facts, right? Just even if you don't understand everyone's fears, what are the top 5 things that we believe that we can explain to our team to help them better understand so that they can make an informed decision about whether they're going to get the vaccine? I think as a leadership team, you also should be preparing and thinking about, what if they're not going to get vaccinated? What am I going to do? How does that impact the organization? And how am I going to start preparing for potential loss of our employees? And what does that mean? So I think it's both sides, right? It's prepping and supporting our team members and making sure they feel comfortable making those decisions, but then also as an organization, realizing there is going to be impact to this requirement, and good or bad, there's going to be change, and we need to start preparing for that as well.
And I think, Donna, if I could parlay onto that, I mean, what's interesting for the healthcare sector, more broadly speaking than just the financial or others, is that we can all, in other industries, you can work from home a lot easier. Now, with telehealth, that opens up a whole nother avenue for your staff to say, well, I'll just go work for a telehealth company and I can work from home and I don't have to deal with this. So suddenly there's some more pressures put on healthcare. Clearly, if people, you can imagine a terrible scene where enough people quit at a principal and you can't admit patients and there's empty beds because there's not staff. And that's just really going to be a juxtaposition that's going to be interesting to watch. Nonetheless, it is a real concern, and amplified by the fact that there are many more ways to work from home in multiple industries that provide your employees with other options.
On those notes too, we did have a question come in from Justin around, will the CMS rule apply to full remote employees as well? And I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on that. I know we're still early on this.
I mean, my opinion would be, I think we don't know the answer to that. I think that's what OSHA has to help us identify. And I think there's probably people right now that are saying, please, please, please let that be the loophole that gets us through this. I certainly wouldn't want to speculate which way it's going to go. I truly don't know the answer to that.
I would agree, Justin. I think you've raised like the seminal issue. And I think some of the things you're going to have to go back and look at are how your job descriptions are written. Like, were they before the COVID or any other pandemic written in a way that says this is an on-site required job, just like minimum job requirements? You have to lift more than 50 pounds, stand for 5 hours, whatever it may be. You need to kind of look at that, and it may need to be adjusted based on the guidelines that come out. But clearly that is a very interesting topic. It kind of leads in also, like, how are you going to manage your vendors? Let's say everyone goes back to work, and you have, in hospital settings, or any healthcare setting, you have lots of suppliers that come in and out. How are you going to feel comfortable, let alone maybe even check or monitor that those vendors coming in have themselves met this rule? And they may not even be big enough vendor where the 100 applies. So maybe they don't have to. What are you going to do about that when trying to create a safe work environment? This is a very murky area that probably will never be fully, it'll constantly be litigated and challenged. But I think if you use the moral compass of, what's the right thing to do, provide a safe work environment, and try to avoid the political divisiveness of the issue, is probably the best general standard to work from.
I appreciate that perspective too. We have one more question, then we'll wrap. We'll wrap for today. But this was we've started to get asked this for those that may be a little bit more unfamiliar with provider trust. One of the things that we do is we live in the world of vendor monitoring and understanding subcontractors and vendor relationships and vendor compliance as well within that population of healthcare. I'm curious, Mike, from your perspective, is this something that you should start looking ahead into the future and start, thinking through, if I was needing to audit vendors to make sure our subcontractors are compliant with this? Is that something that's on your mind?
In its extreme case, it could go as far as being similar to a BAA. What do you have to prove downstream compliance? I don't think it's going to get that far. And that's just my personal opinion, because OSHA can't, certainly monitor that. They barely gonna be able to enforce probably the violators. That's for OSHA. CMS, has a bigger war chest to work from. So I do think it's best practice, if nothing else, and provides a safer work environment and comfort level for your staff to know that whatever you're applying to them applies to vendors. Now, how you track that, and are you badging them? Are you checking that? That is, open Wild West territory. I think what's going to be interesting to see is whether there are whistleblowers, right, that just are looking for you to step into making a mistake or watching something, especially if ultimately, which there is not currently, but if ultimately there's financial reward for turning in violators. So this gets hairy pretty quickly. No matter how you look at it, I'm not trying to paint a doom and gloom, but it is something to think through beyond just protecting your employees. How are you going to embed vendor compliance?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Donna. Friends, that's all for today. I think the hope is that we can do a lot more of these as we start to learn more. We can host quick 15, 20-minute sessions and just let you hear what we're thinking and where our head's at. We did have a lot of questions come in. We just don't have the time to answer them live today. I will make sure if you asked a question, I'll make sure it gets to Mike and to Donna. We can get you an answer, or at least point you in the right direction on where to go and what we learn. And then I would just say, friends, be on the lookout for another session just like this, just coffee with Mike and Donna, as we start to learn more about these rules, regulations, requirements, and we can give you a sense of what we're thinking and hearing about. We live uniquely at the intersection of HR, compliance, and a lot of this is it just hits our wheelhouse, and at least hits our ears at a minimum. So as we start to learn more, we'll make sure to get it in front of you all so y'all can be best prepared for the road ahead. That's it, friends. Have a wonderful Thursday. Appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us. And be on the lookout. We did record this session. If you want to go back and listen to it, you'll get that recording via email sometime today. With any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. We're here to help. Thank you, friends. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Wonderful rest of the week.